Hello, this is the Logos video from Ms. G's Comp 2 classes. In this video, I'll talk about the reading, about arguments based on facts and reason, and take a quick look at the reading journal that's due. And of course, you should read the chapter before you watch this video, and the course you see in this video might not be the one you're enrolled in. So something I want you guys to think about when it comes to logos is not only how to use it effectively, but to watch out for it being used ineffectively. And of course, to not be taken in by it, but also not to use it ineffectively in our own arguments. So this meme just kind of points out this idea that, if someone says they have a study, we're maybe just expected to accept that on face value or tend to. So of course, we don't want to be that kind of reader. So in terms of writing, I want you guys to know the difference between artistic and inartistic proofs because there is a distinction in the journal that I want you guys to know. And when we think about logos, we usually think about statistics and facts, and that's actually only one kind of proof. So let's look at those first because those are the ones that we normally think of. Okay, so another way of thinking about inartistic proofs is hard evidence. So something like facts, statistics, surveys, and polls, testimonies, and narratives. So firsthand experience is hard evidence, as well as these numbers. Okay, so that's what we normally think of when we think of logos, and it is part of logos. So for the first part of the reading journal, for part one, I want you to think about a hypothetical situation. Which is I want you to think about arguing to the UCM administration that UCM should have more security cameras on campus. Okay, so given this hypothetical situation and this audience, what kinds of inartistic proofs could you use? So if we look at the actual journal question, right, list two kinds of inartistic evidence that might help support your argument. So think about what kinds of facts, statistics, surveys, polls, or narratives that could maybe help support that argument. And again, I'm thinking of, okay, UCM administration, they're the suits, it's the president, it's the provost, it's those big guys. So what do they care about? And how could you appeal to that logically? Okay. So some things we should think about when we use inartistic proofs. Sometimes it's hard to tell good evidence from biased or fake evidence. So especially on the reading side, it's really important for us to dig and look at the sources and make sure we're getting actual raw data as opposed to interpretations of data. And also, again, from the writing point of view, if you use bad evidence, that makes you look bad. Okay, so that also affects your ethos. And again, numbers require interpretation, so make sure that you're interpreting correctly, but also that you're being interpreted to correctly. And that leads to part two of our journal. So let me switch to that, and I'll come back to this artistic point in a minute. So part two of the journal asks us, as the chapter points out, statistical evidence only becomes useful when it's interpreted fairly and reasonably, right? So like I was just saying, what I would like you to do for part two is find a chart of the day, just pick one of them from this website, and then using the information in that chart, come up with three very different claims, at least two of which make different points. Okay, and I'm going to make an example here in a second. The point here is not to learn to use data dishonestly, but to see firsthand how some statistics serve in a variety of arguments. And of course, I put a note there to please be sure to attach or link to your chart in your response or take a picture of it. So let me give an example of what I'm looking for part two. Okay, so I pulled this chart from that website about a year ago, so it's slightly out of date, and actually it was from 2017 anyways. So this is the highest ranking teacher salary, where what states they are from, and then the lowest ranking. So a topic close to my heart, let's say. I came up with a few responses or claims I could make based on this data. All right, and again, these are slightly dishonest because I'm trying to come up with contrary claims. So the first one I thought of was New York pays their teachers more than twice as much as Oklahoma, so 83,000 versus 41,000. So New York citizens care more about education. So it's sort of interpreting based on this higher salary, I'm interpreting that it's due to how much they care about education again. So an opposite claim could be that New York pays their teachers such a high living wage because their state taxes are so high. All right, so teachers get paid out of that money. And then sort of this one kind of is similar to the first one, but maybe in opposite terms. And I said Alabama has such a low ranking in education, which I linked to a source for that, because they do not pay their teachers very well. So I guess kind of inverse, right? If you have low income, low payment, if you pay your teachers not very well, they're not going to be very good teachers, right? As opposed to if you care about your teachers, you will pay them well. So have fun with this part. Like, don't think too much about it, but do try to think of ways that you can make different kinds of arguments based on the same set of data. Okay. So now let's talk about artistic proof. So I started out, explaining that there's a difference between inartistic and artistic proof. So we already looked at inartistic in the first part of part one, and then part two of the journal asked you to think about that kind of evidence. And again, that's what we normally think of when we think of logos. But there's actually another side, and the way I remember this side is artistic proofs is proofs that we come up with ourselves. Like we have to invent it or create it, like art. Okay. Whereas inartistic proof is information or evidence that we are given, right? So, studies and things like that, like from the previous screen. Okay, so some ways that we can use artistic proofs are, gosh darn it, I did it again. Okay, so common sense and reason appeals to logic, right? It just makes sense. So when you make sense, of course, that appeals to those logical, to the reader's brain. But another sort of more structured way we can appeal to logic is through what our book calls logical structure. So matters of degree, making an analogy, and matters of precedent. So what those are, a matter of degree is where you make an argument like if some ice cream is good, a lot of ice cream is better, right? So saying like if a little bit is good, a lot is better, right? So sort of magnifying a point, right? Or evidence of a point. Analogy, just like it sounds, right? Comparing two things that might not be similar. And the example I think is really good in the book on this one. And it talks about comparing teachers and how we treat them to how we treat soldiers, right? And this is at the bottom of page 76. So, if a war or something like that goes wrong, we don't blame the soldiers. So why do we do that with teachers, right? So it's comparing those two jobs and how we treat them. And then precedent, again, this is all explained in the book, so definitely make sure you read that carefully. But precedent is a law, some of you might be familiar with it from law or criminal justice classes. So it's generally like cases or examples that have been decided before, all right? So if it was good enough then, right, kind of thing, this court case can be, solved the same way. Okay, so part two of part one of the journal, and I'll look at it again, asks us to, in that same hypothetical controversy about should UCM have more security cameras, I want you to choose one of these. So degree, analogy, or precedent, okay? And then come up with a proof for why we should have more security cameras on campus. So I'm going to give an example, and I do not want you to use this in the journal, okay? So I would say matter of degree would be one logical proof or artistic proof I could use. And I would say if 5 cameras catch 5% of the crime on campus, then doubling our cameras will double our how much crime we catch. Okay, so matter of degree. A small amount of cameras catches a small amount of crime, a larger amount, right? So let's go look at that question in Blackboard. So what I was looking at was this part 2 of part 1. Choose one of those logical structures and construct a proof to support that same hypothetical argument. Okay. So that should be pretty straightforward. I just illustrated in the video. I already looked at part 2 of the journal, so that takes us back. That's all I have for the logos video. Just shoot me an email if you have any questions.